So now we want to bring you an excerpt of an interview I did with Dahlia Lithwick. She's been on the show before, and she writes on the courts. She's been following and analyzing the Alito leaked draft on the Supreme Court decision around abortion rights and how this sits in the context of other fundamental rights that are also under attack. I think it'd be good to go to that segment right now. She writes on the courts and the law for Slate.com, and she is the host of the podcast Amicus. I am so happy to welcome back to the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, Dahlia Lithwick. Dahlia, how are you?
I'm about as tired as I suspect you are. This has been, I want to say that this month has been the longest year of my life, but it's just going to get worse.
This morning, the New York Times did a big story on, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it yet, but it was doing, zeroed in on Missouri, but I think it's true overall, that in a post-Roe world, predicting that Roe falls, birth control is the next frontier, the next thing that's being banned, that's being put out of reach. And of course, for anybody who's been really following the rise of this Christian fascist assault on abortion rights, it's been clear they're coming for birth control too. They've always opposed birth control, sex education, all of that, because their program is really to reverse and bring women back into forced motherhood and a domestic role that to a degree has been broken down in recent generations. But it is a shock to many people to start to see this. And I wonder if you want to comment on that, as well as the reality of the legal tie between the foundations of Roe v. Wade and the right to birth control, and what it means if Roe falls for women's right and access to birth control.
So I think your predicate is exactly correct, that the same doctrinal bucket of protections that gave us Roe and Casey, and that, by the way, give us Obergefell, right, marriage equality, and give us Lawrence, which strikes down Texas's sodomy law, the same bucket is Griswold, right? It protects birth control, and it's Loving versus Virginia. It protects interracial marriage. All of that comes together. Those are called dismissively in Justice Alito's draft opinion. They're just unenumerated rights. It's just this ephemeral, vaporous, substantive due process. You may remember from the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings, Senator John Cornyn from Texas, Marsha Blackburn, these rights are meaningless. They're not tethered to anything. They were just made up. Well, if you take away Roe v. Wade, you pull that sort of Jenga piece out and you say, well, Roe and Casey are not protected because, as Justice Justice Alito writes, they are not, quote, deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions, then none of those other rights we just talked about are either, right? I mean, it is clear that LGBTQ freedom, the right to use birth control within a marriage, that's Griswold, the right to marry someone of a different race, that's Loving, all of that goes away too. And so for the court to even try to say, oh, we're pulling out this one Jenga piece, but the rest of the puzzle stands, is just completely fatuous. And I would add, this is the same court that's striking down precedent saying, just trust us, we won't strike down the other precedent. And so take that sort of for the paper it's written on. And then I think your larger point is really descriptively correct. I think that it is impossible. If you, for instance, thought about Hobby Lobby, the case where the court was saying that birth control is, in the minds of some employers, an abortifacient, something that triggers birth control and therefore does not have abortion. To be. Right. So if you say that, birth control, that Ella, Plan B, whatever it is, and the court already kind of conceded that in Hobby Lobby, then how can those quote unquote abortifacients not be next on the chopping block? And so I think you're descriptively correct that the folks who say, oh, no, this begins at Roe and it ends at Roe, it won't go any further, trust us, are the same people who are going to be pushing for a federal abortion ban, right? I mean, the idea that this is going to be left up to the states, I think, is fanciful. And they are some of the same jurisdictions like Oklahoma that are passing laws that say that life begins at conception. And that sweeps in, right? It has to sweep in IVF. It has to sweep in surrogacy. And as you say, it has to sweep in what you and I would think of as medically necessary birth control. And so I think it's very tempting for people who want to be mollified to say, okay, if Justice Alito is promising me that they're not coming for LGBTQ rights next, or they're not coming for contraception next, I'm going to take him at his word. But you're exactly right. If you look at this, as Justice Alito clearly does in the Dobbs opinion, as having to do with quote unquote unborn human beings, and it's a phrase he repeats over and over again, the states are going to be free to determine what an unborn human being is. And that's already happening in some jurisdictions. And I think it's going to continue to happen. And the idea that we can't imagine it is kind of on us.
So, Sunsara, following up on that segment of your interview with Dahlia Lithwick, we thought it'd be good to show a short excerpt of the film B.A. Bob Avakian Speaks, Revolution Nothing Less, where he speaks to some of what it follows what she's been saying and what we've been talking about. He says, don't be fooled by these so-called right-to-lifers. This is not about killing babies.
Don't let these people tell you, these so-called right-to-lifers, that the issue is the killing of innocent babies. The issue is the control over women exercised by forcing them to be mothers, whether or not they want to be at that time. Now, to have children, to raise children, can be a really beautiful experience if that's what you want to do and if you feel in a position to do it in the way that you feel that it should be done. But to have it forced on you is virtual enslavement. Not to even have the choice as to whether you will do that. And here's the key to how you know, or one key to how you know this is not about killing of innocent babies. Try to find one of these rabid anti-abortion groups that is also not opposed to birth control. You'll have a very hard time. They're all opposed to birth control because the issue is not the killing of innocent babies. It's the control and subordination of women who are regarded as getting all out of hand these days in this society, which is another reason why we have, or a contributing factor to why we have this vicious pornography. So the goal of these attacks on abortion and, yes, on birth control, the right to them, is to deny women the ability to determine something as basic as when or if they will have children and raise children or be part of raising them, forcing motherhood on them once again and enslaving them in that way. Along with all this, millions of women and girls, millions every year in this country alone, are raped, assaulted, battered, and abused, often by those who claim to be their intimate lovers, while the half of humanity that is female is everywhere treated as less than fully human. Once again, I think about the experience of black people in slavery. You know what one of the main terms the slave owners used to describe the slaves? Talking tools. Because this is how they regarded them, and this is how they were treated. They were put on the auction block to be sold, and their physical attributes were examined. Their teeth, if they were women, their reproductive potential, their body shapes, their ability to work hard, their musculature. All this was examined in the most degrading way. And you think of the same thing with women today. Reduced to objects to be used by men, treated as brood animals to turn out babies, and as unthinking flesh to be consumed and plundered, with their bodies and body parts used to sell products, pimped out and beaten into submission, plundered to portray and promote sex as conquest and domination by men instead of shared pleasure based on mutual affection and equality. All of this degrades and demeans not only the women who are directly subjected to the most extreme forms of this, but all women everywhere. What kind of system is this? And why should anyone accept that this is the best possible way the world could be? And those whose sexual orientation is different from and seen as posing a threat to the dominant gender and sex relations, lesbians and gays, bisexual and transgendered people, or those who are simply unsure about their sexuality and questioning it at a given time, are harassed, bullied, often bullied to the point of committing suicide, brutalized, and even murdered. And despite certain changes in law and government policy, the reality of LGBT people being discriminated against, insulted, and even assaulted continues as a marked feature of the culture and society, bound up with deep-seated structural relations of this whole system, closely connected to the patriarchy and male supremacy that oppress women. Even those among the middle class, who may not directly experience much of the daily horror of this system, still live in a world deeply scarred by this, and have life cheapened, personal relations warped and poisoned, and dreams and horizons lowered and narrowed by the exploitative, oppressive, and destructive nature and functioning of this system, and the truly putrid culture that spews forth from it and serves to reinforce it.
So once again, that was Bob Avakian from BA Speaks, Revolution Nothing Less. So Sansara, some words now to close this whole segment we've done on abortion. It's been very extensive, but what is it that we need to leave people with? What is it that people need to do?
Look, the take home right now is this is a time to make it count. What you stand for, what your life is about, who you care for, and what kind of future you want to see. Now is the time to show it in word and deed. And so I want to call on you last time for this episode. Get to DC if there's any way possible and support those who are in DC and raise hell wherever you are and direct that. Really direct it to reaching other people and shaking them out of their complacency and getting them to stand up, because there is still time to stop the Supreme Court from taking away abortion rights. There is still time, but there is not much time. And what we do right now really counts. So come to DC, and this is a big part. It is a huge part of the fight for a better future overall. If we want a fighting people, we have to be fighting people right now. That is the time. If we want a bright future, we have to be forging it in these streets with each other. This is a critical thing. So that's how I want to end this segment today.
Okay. We'll see you soon, Sansara.